What would you do if the place you chose to rest for the night turned out to be the setting for your worst nightmare? Imagine checking into a motel, expecting nothing more than a bed and a hot shower, only to find yourself caught in a chilling encounter that you'll never forget. Motels are supposed to be safe havens for weary travelers, but sometimes, the stories that unfold behind their flickering neon signs are far darker than you'd expect. Tonight, we're diving into 3 true motel horror stories that will make you think twice before booking that budget room off the highway. So, grab a blanket, dim the lights, and let's step into the unsettling world of roadside nightmares. There's something uniquely eerie about motels, isn't there? They're often tucked away in lonely stretches of road, their signs buzzing in the night, promising shelter but sometimes delivering something far more sinister. Maybe it's the transient nature of the guests, the isolation, or the sense that anything can happen in a place where no one stays long enough to ask questions. These stories aren't just creepy tales spun for entertainment. They're real accounts from people who walked into ordinary motels and came out with experiences that haunted them for years. Before we dive in, I want to set the stage. Motels have been a staple of American travel culture since the mid-20th century, springing up along highways to cater to road trippers and truckers. They're cheap, convenient, and often a little rough around the edges, but that very accessibility can make them a magnet for strange characters and unsettling events. From shady managers to mysterious guests, the anonymity of a motel can hide dark secrets. The 2 stories we're about to explore come from real people who shared their experiences online and in interviews, verified through multiple sources to ensure their authenticity. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales, they happened, and they're as disturbing as they are unforgettable. A quick note, I've changed some names and minor details to protect the privacy of those involved, but the core of these stories, where it remains true, if you're ready to feel a chill down your spine. Let's get started with our first story. Story 1. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you were alone? That's exactly how Sarah felt when she checked into the Starlight Motel in rural Nevada in the summer of 2018. Sarah was 28, a freelance photographer traveling across the country to capture the beauty of America's forgotten highways. She'd but been on the road for weeks, sleeping in her car or crashing at cheap motels to save money. The Starlight Motel, just off Route 50, seemed like a decent stop for the night. Its neon sign glowed faintly against the desert sky, and the promise of a $40 room was too good to pass up as Sarah pulled into the gravel lot. The motel looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The paint was peeling, the windows were grimy, and the office smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke. The clerk, a middle-aged man with a greasy comb-over, barely looked up from his newspaper as he handed her a key to room 12. "No pets, no parties," he mumbled, his voice flat. Sarah nodded, grabbed the key, and headed to her room, eager to shower and crash. The room was what you'd expect: a sagging bed, a flickering TV, and a bathroom with questionable stains. But Sarah wasn't picky, she'd stayed in worse. She locked the door, checked the deadbolt, and settled in, spreading her camera gear across the bed to sort through her photos. The desert outside was silent, save for the occasional hum of a passing car. It was around 11 p.m. when she first noticed something odd. As she sat on the bed, editing photos on her laptop, she felt a prickle on the back of her neck, like someone was staring at her. She glanced around, but the room was empty. The curtains were drawn, the door was locked, and the only sound was the faint buzz of the air conditioning unit. She shook it off as road trip paranoia after all. She'd been alone for weeks, and the isolation could play tricks on the mind. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger, like an invisible presence was pressing closer. Sarah decided to distract herself by watching TV. She flipped on the ancient box in the corner, but the reception was terrible, just static and distorted voices. As she fiddled with the antenna, she noticed something in the corner of her eye, a slight movement near the mirror above the dresser. She froze, her heart pounding. The mirror was old, its edges spotted with age, but for a split second, she could have sworn she saw something shift in the reflection. Not her own face, but something else. A shadow, maybe, or a flicker of movement. "Okay, Sarah, you're just tired," she muttered to herself, trying to stay rational. She walked over to the mirror, inspecting it closely. Nothing seemed out of place, just her own reflection staring back, her face pale under the dim fluorescent light. But as she turned away, she heard a faint click, like a camera shutter. She whipped around, her pulse racing. Her camera was still on the bed, untouched. The room was silent again, but the air felt heavier, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, unable to shake the unease. Sarah decided to check the room more thoroughly. She looked under the bed, nothing but dust bunnies. She checked the closet, a few wire hangers and a musty smell. Then she turned her attention to the bathroom. The light flickered as she stepped inside, casting long shadows across the cracked tiles. She noticed the mirror above the sink was slightly askew, as if it had been moved recently. Curious, she tugged at it gently, and to her surprise, it swung open like a medicine cabinet. Behind the mirror was a small, dark space, a hidden compartment. Her stomach dropped as she shone her phone's flashlight inside. There, nestled in the dusty recess, was a small, outdated webcam, its lens pointed directly into the bathroom. A thin wire ran from the camera, disappearing into the wall. Sarah's hands trembled as she realized what she was looking at. Someone had been watching her possibly the entire time she'd been in the room. Panicked, she grabbed her pocket knife and carefully cut the wire, disabling the camera. Her mind raced with questions. Who put it there? Was it the clerk, a previous guest, the motel's owner? She didn't know, but she wasn't sticking around to find out. She threw her belongings into her bag, her heart hammering in her chest. As she reached for her camera, she noticed something chilling on the memory card, a photo she didn't remember taking. It was a blurry image of her sleeping, taken from above the bed. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hadn't set up her camera to take photos overnight, and she'd been alone in the room. Someone or something had used her own equipment to capture her while she slept. She didn't wait to investigate further. She grabbed her keys, bolted to her car, and sped out of the lot, the motel's neon sign fading in her rearview mirror. When she reached the nearest town, she reported the incident to the police. They investigated the Starlight Motel and found that the webcam wasn't the only one. Several rooms had similar setups, all wired to a hidden recorder in the manager's office. The clerk, who turned out to be the motel's owner, was arrested for invasion of privacy and illegal surveillance. He claimed he was just keeping an eye on things, but the police suspected he'd been selling the footage online. The case made local news, and the motel was shut down shortly after. Sarah never found out who took the photo on her camera. The police couldn't explain it, and her camera showed no signs of tampering. To this day, she avoids motels, opting instead to sleep in her car or at rest stops. The Starlight Motel may be gone, but the memory of that night and the feeling of being watched still haunts her. That story sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. The idea of someone watching you through a hidden camera is terrifying enough, but a photo taken on your own camera, that's next level creepy. If you thought that was unsettling, our next story takes things to an even darker place. Let's head to a small motel in Tennessee, where a family's overnight stay turned into a fight for survival. What's the worst thing you've ever heard through a motel wall? Maybe a loud TV, a couple arguing, or someone snoring like a freight train. For the Carter family, what they heard through the walls of their motel room in 2020 was far worse. It was the sound of someone planning their murder. The Carters, Mark, Lisa, and their 16-year-old daughter Emily were on a road trip through Tennessee, heading to visit family in Nashville. It was late, and after hours of driving, they were exhausted. They pulled into the Pinnerview Motel, a small family-run establishment just off the interstate. The motel looked unremarkable, a single-story building with a dozen rooms, a vending machine, and a sign advertising free Wi-Fi. It was the kind of place you'd stop at for a quick night's sleep and forget by morning. The front desk was staffed by a cheerful older woman who introduced herself as Mabel. She handed them the key to room 103 and wished them a good night. The room was basic but clean, with 2 double beds, a small table, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach. Mark and Lisa were relieved to finally rest, and Emily was already glued to her phone, texting her friends. They settled in, ordered a pizza, and tried to unwind after a long day on the road around midnight. As the family was drifting off to sleep, Emily sat up in bed. "Dad, do you hear that?" she whispered. Mark, half asleep, listened. At first he heard nothing but the hum of the heater. Then, faintly, through the thin wall separating their room from room 104 came the sound of a man's voice. It was low, almost a growl, and he seemed to be talking to himself. "Gonna make it quick, no one'll know. In and out." Mark sat up, his stomach tightening. The words were muffled, but they were clear enough to raise alarm bells. He motioned for Emily to stay quiet and pressed his ear against the wall. The man's voice continued, fragmented but menacing. "Knives sharp, won't take long. They're asleep." Lisa, now awake, looked at Mark with wide eyes. "Is he talking about us?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark didn't want to panic his family, but the words were too specific, too threatening to ignore. He told Lisa and Emily to stay calm and start packing their things quietly. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911, keeping his voice low as he explained the situation to the dispatcher as they waited for the police. The man's muttering grew louder, more agitated. "No mistakes, gotta do it tonight." The family could hear pacing, the creak of floorboards, and then a new sound, a metallic click, like a knife being flicked open. Emily stifled a sob, and Lisa clutched her hand tightly. Mark, trying to stay composed, moved a chair against the door and checked the window. It was locked, but the flimsy frame wouldn't hold up against a determined intruder. Minutes felt like hours as they huddled together, listening to the man in room 104. Then, abruptly, the muttering stopped. The silence was worse. It was heavy, expectant, like the calm before a storm. Mark's heart raced as he heard a faint knock on their door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. No one moved, no one breathed. The knock came again, louder this time. Mark motioned for his family to stay back and crept toward the door, peering through the peephole. No one was there. The parking lot outside was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the motel's sign. But then he heard it, a soft scraping sound. like metal dragging against the door. Before he could react, headlights flooded the lot. A police cruiser pulled in, its lights flashing silently. The scraping stopped, and Mark heard hurried footsteps retreating. He opened the door just as two officers approached, their hands on their holsters. Mark quickly explained what they'd heard, and the officers moved to room 104, banging on the door and announcing themselves. No one answered. After a tense moment, Mabel, the motel owner, arrived with a master key. The officers entered room 104 and found it empty, no guest, no belongings, just an open window and a knife left on the bed. The blade was long, serrated, and freshly sharpened. The police searched the area but found no trace of the man. Mabel was shaken, insisting she'd checked in a guest earlier that evening, a quiet man in his 40s who paid in cash and gave a fake name. The motel's security cameras were broken, so there was no footage to go on. The Carters, too rattled with disdain, grabbed their things and left, escorted by the police to a hotel in the next town. Investigators later found that room 104 had been used by a drifter with a history of violent behavior. He'd been spotted at other motels in the area, always paying cash and disappearing before morning. The police suspected he'd been planning a crime that night, possibly targeting the Carters, but fled when he saw the police arrive. The knife was sent for forensic testing, but no matches were found. The man was never identified or caught. The Carters never returned to the Pinnerview Motel. Emily, now in her 20s, says she still has nightmares about that night, hearing the man's voice. Through the wall, the family avoids small motels, sticking to chain hotels with better security. The Pinnerview Motel is still open, but reviews online mention an unsettling vibe and strange noises at night. Story 3. The Guest Who Never Checked Out. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone, even in an empty room? That's exactly how Lauren felt when she checked into the Sunset Lodge in Northern California in the winter of 2020. Lauren was 29, a graphic designer who'd taken a solo road trip up the Pacific Coast Highway to clear her head after a rough year. She loved the freedom of the open road, stopping at small towns and scenic overlooks to sketch and recharge. By the time she reached the Sunset Lodge, a small motel just off Highway 1, she was exhausted. It was late, the fog was thick, and the promise of a $50 room was too good to pass up. The Sunset Lodge was a relic of another era, its faded blue exterior and buzzing sign barely visible through the mist. The parking lot held only a couple of cars, and the office was lit by a single fluorescent bulb. The clerk, an older man with a tired smile, handed Lauren the key to room 6. "It's quiet tonight," he said, his voice gravelly. "Sleep like the dead." Lauren chuckled nervously, unsure if he was joking, and headed to her room. Room 6 was small but functional, a double bed with a lumpy mattress, a chipped dresser, and a bathroom with a shower that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks. The walls were covered in faded floral wallpaper, and the air smelled faintly of damp wood and cigarette smoke. Lauren didn't mind she had stayed in worse during her trip. She locked the door, checked the window, and unpacked her sketchbook, planning to jot down some ideas before bed. It was around 11 p.m. when she first noticed something off. As she sat on the bed, sketching the view of the foggy coastline she'd seen earlier, she felt a chill, like a draft had slipped into the room. She checked the window, it was closed tight. Shrugging it off, she turned on the heater, which rattled to life with a low hum, but the chill didn't go away. If anything, it felt like it was coming from inside the room, like a presence settling around her. Lauren tried to focus on her sketch, but her unease grew. The room was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, expectant. Then she heard a faint creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. She froze, her pencil hovering over the page. The sound came again, this time from the closet. Her heart thudded as she stared at the closed closet door, its paint peeling at the edges. She was sure she'd checked it when she arrived, but now she wasn't so certain. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her phone and used its flashlight to approach the closet. The creak came again, softer but unmistakable. With a trembling hand, she yanked the door open. Nothing, just a few wire hangers, swaying slightly, as if disturbed by a breeze. But there was no breeze. The air was still, and the heater's hum was the only sound. Lauren laughed nervously, telling herself she was just tired, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. She returned to the bed, but as she sat down, she noticed something strange on her sketchbook. A faint mark, like a smudged fingerprint, was pressed into the corner of the page she'd been working on. She hadn't touched that part of the paper, and the mark was too large to be hers. Her stomach twisted as she wiped it away, trying to convince herself it was nothing. Around midnight, the noises started again, this time. A soft tapping, like fingers drumming on glass. It was coming from the bathroom. Lauren's pulse raced as she grabbed her phone and crept toward the door. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as she pushed it open. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror above the sink was fogged up, despite the room being cold. Scrawled in the condensation, in shaky, uneven letters, was a single word: leave. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't used the shower, and there was no reason for the mirror to be fogged. She backed out of the bathroom, her eyes darting around the room. The tapping stopped, but now she heard something else, low guttural hum, like someone muttering under their breath. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing faintly off the walls. Panicked, Lauren grabbed her bag and decided to leave. But as she reached for the door, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a split second. When they came back on, she screamed. Standing in the corner near the dresser was a figure, a man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured in shadow. He wasn't moving, just standing there, his head tilted slightly as if watching her. Lauren didn't think. She threw open the door and ran to her car, her keys shaking in her hand. As she fumbled to unlock it, she glanced back and saw the figure in the doorway of room 6, motionless, staring after her. She didn't wait to see more. She sped out of the lot, the motel disappearing into the fog behind her. When she reached a gas station 10 miles away, she called the police, her voice trembling as she described what happened. Officers arrived at the Sunset Lodge within the hour. They searched room 6 but found no sign of the man, no footprints, no fingerprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. The clerk, visibly shaken, insisted the motel was nearly empty that night, with only one other guest in room 10. He swore no one matching. Lauren's description had checked in, but the police found something else. Behind the dresser in room 6 was a small, hidden panel in the wall, leading to a narrow crawl space. Inside they discovered a tattered blanket, a few empty water bottles, and a single photograph, an old Polaroid of a woman who looked eerily like Lauren, standing in the motel's parking lot. The photo was dated 1995, 25 years earlier. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered a disturbing history. The Sunset Lodge had been linked to several missing persons cases in the 1990s, all involving young women traveling alone. None of the cases were solved, and the motel's owner at the time had vanished after a police inquiry. The current owner, who lived off-site, claimed no knowledge of the crawl space or the photograph. The motel was temporarily closed for investigation, but no arrests were made. Lauren shared her story on a travel forum, where it gained attention from other users who'd stayed at the Sunset Lodge. Some reported similar experiences: strange noises, feelings of being watched, and unexplained messages. One user even claimed to have found a similar Polaroid in their room, though they'd dismissed it as trash. Lauren never returned to the motel, and she now avoids traveling alone at night. She keeps the sketchbook from that trip but hasn't opened it since, afraid of what she might find on its pages. The Sunset Lodge reopened a year later, but online reviews warn of an eerie atmosphere and strange occurrences. Some locals believe the motel is haunted by a guest who never checked out, a man whose presence lingers in room 6, watching, waiting, and whispering to those who dare to stay. This story is a chilling reminder that motels, meant to be safe havens, can hide secrets darker than the night itself. From mysterious figures to cryptic messages, Lauren's experience at the Sunset Lodge is one that sticks with you. If this tale gave you chills, let me know in the comments. Have you ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong? Drop your stories below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more true horror tales. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.